Christopher Nolan has spent nearly 3 decades building a reputation as one of the greatest filmmakers in our generation, from Memento to The Dark Knight to Interstellar and Oppenheimer. Every single film that Nolan has released feels like a genuine major event in the timeline of our world. When it was announced that he was going to do the Odyssey, I specifically was extremely excited due to being a classics and history student, adapting one of the oldest stories ever written. The expectations, genuinely, I don't think could have been any higher. This film had so much to do. It is a retelling of a story that survived an extremely long time, inspired countless stories, and genuinely the big question was, could Nolan make this spectacular? We all know his ability, and definitely he could. I just think the question was whether he could capture what was made for this story. And I have finally seen the Odyssey 2026, and I have so much to talk about it for you guys. Some of the things in this film completely blew me away. There were some surprises, and there's one or two decisions that I'm not entirely convinced by. I have read the entire book from start to finish probably 5 times. So in this review, I'm going to break down the story, the performances, the direction he went with, the visuals, the music, and its faithfulness to the original epic, and whether it's just a masterpiece for Nolan or one of his weaker efforts. So without further ado, let's get right into this one. Firstly, for me, I've got to talk about the story, because that is the foundation of this film. I think one of the things I appreciated was how quickly it established the world that it is placed in. It doesn't spend 20-30 minutes explaining every little detail. There was a lot of exposition, sometimes you could argue too much exposition, but I think he trusts you guys to piece things together as the story unfolds, and that is something you come to expect from a lot of his films, especially things like Tenet, you know? This doesn't always work. It doesn't always necessarily work. Some people will come out of this confused, and that is fair enough. Do I overall think it was confusing? No. Was it investing? Certainly. And was it engaging? Yes. And did it flow? Yes. I definitely think it could be argued that pieces of it put together could be hard to follow, because the book is in a format called in media res, where it starts in the middle of the story. The pacing can feel a little bit slow, especially at the start, but personally, it explores Odysseus' internal struggles, where I think the pacing slows, and I think that is going to depend on what you're looking for, whether you find that positive or negative. I think its accuracy to the story was pretty incredible. I love Christopher Nolan's practicality. I loved the practicality of Circe when she was moulding Odysseus' men into pigs. I loved the fact that the Cyclops, Polyphemus, was a full puppet. I loved the fact that he made the whirlpool fully practical, in which jet skis, I think, were used to make it. I loved those practical elements that Nolan brings, and you can feel that when watching the film. I think from start to finish, you're hooked. It's why people are saying it's such a bad film to go to watch if you need the toilet. Genuinely, it's such a bad film to go see if you need the toilet, because you're there, hooked. There doesn't feel like a break. I think you can get into a negative in that sense, because I think there were parts of the story that were cut, parts that I think needed to be kept because they were so good. But the problem with that is you would then have a 4-hour film or a 5-hour film, and you can't do that. So I understand things had to be cut. I don't know whether things that were right should have been cut, or maybe other sections of the film, for example, maybe focusing less on Troy. But then you need to make it cinematic. I can see why he made his decisions, but I think it can definitely be argued that some should have been made differently. Nolan, with what he had, making it into a 3-hour film that doesn't feel like 3 hours, he did an amazing job. I found the quiet moments where I think people would argue the pacing slowed helped you engage with the characters, and I loved that. The way he approached the story elements that he did keep in were very accurate. He did them all very well, and I am very impressed with how he managed it. So overall, I would genuinely give the story and the reliability to the film a very high score, because though he cut aspects out, aspects that could have been important, I think if he'd kept them in and made it a 4-hour film, which would be some new groundbreaking thing, there would be a lot more complaints, because I think that is too long. That is way too long. I think 3 hours can be too long, and that's one of the quarrels I have. I think 3 hours can feel a bit too long, but you know, you can't have both. You can't have every element of the book in the film while it being a short enough film for you to enjoy. I think you can enjoy it at the length it is. It shouldn't be longer, it shouldn't be shorter. I think it's perfect where it is, and that's another aspect of the film I really. Next, I'm going to go on to the characters and the performances from everybody. Wow. Let me just say wow. I mean, let's start with Matt Damon as Odysseus. Unreal performance. I think could be Oscar worthy. He'll definitely get nominated. I don't know whether he'll win it, but the characters are so compelling, and I think people saying that the casting was wrong, they should have casted unknowns, they should have casted time accurate Greek actors and stuff. I think my opinion on all this is people have problems with things like Tom Holland saying dad and stuff as well. I think my opinion on this, I'm going to set this straight now. It's mythology. I really don't care. It's a movie. Though I'm a classicist, though I'm a historian, yes, you can argue it's just not accurate. But at the end of the day, it is a movie. It is a mythology. It's not trying to be a historically accurate documentary because it wasn't a real event. I think you can add some glamour to the armor. You can add these things because it is a mythology. Realistically as well, I think Tom Holland's argument as well that he made in an interview is, yes, they wouldn't say dad, but they wouldn't say father either because they'd be speaking in Greek. How would the whole world enjoy the film? Yes, you could use subtitles, but it would be incredibly difficult to enjoy a film spoken Old Greek and Latin, you know? I think genuinely I don't have problems with any of the actors, and I think they all stood their ground and did an incredible job. Matt Damon, Tom Holland, Anne Hathaway, Robert Pattinson, John Leguizamo, Charlize Theron, even bloody Travis Scott, they were amazing. You know, Elliot Page, Samantha Morton and Cersei as well will really stand out for me. John Bernthal, Zendaya, they all had their moments and they all had amazing moments. They were done so well. Oh, I was very impressed with every single piece of acting in this film. This is one of the strongest ensembles of cast that Nolan has done, and I incredibly enjoyed it. The direction of this film is what I'm going to discuss next, how Nolan handled it, and there's a lot of expectation. Whenever Nolan directs it, there's gonna be a lot of expectation. Unlike Oppenheimer, which relied on dialogue, political tension, you have to balance the character moments with the enormous mythological spectacle. Does Nolan pull that off? Yes, he does. The practicality makes it feel even better and cooler. I loved every single element of practicality, from the Lystragonians being real, like 7-foot stunt actors, to the practical Cyclops, to the practicality of Cersei, to the practicality of Troy, the Trojan horse being built, like everything being practical, and, you know, Skillet and Charybdis, like, genuinely, I love the practicality of Nolan's films, and the Odyssey is another one that does that so well. Next, visually, this film is breathtaking. Like, you could make the argument, based off of some of the other things in this film, this is an unreal film, yet it's not a great adaptation. Personally, I don't believe and agree with that, but I think everyone has the consensus that this is an unreal film. It's visually beautiful, it sounds amazing, and it is done very well. I don't agree with it being a bad adaptation. Some people are saying that, some people are saying it's great, you know, that's just opinions. But this film is unreal. The lighting, the composition, the camera movement, the colour palette, the practical effects, everything was amazing. I think I have actually one qualm with the colour. There's a moment where Odysseus returns with this bright purple cloak. You know, there's a lot of colour described in the Odyssey, and it is fantastical, it is mythological. I think you shouldn't take away the colour of a film. It could have been more colourful, if you know what I mean. For certain moments, like Polyphemus' cave for the war, I understand that being more dark, being more gritty. But when you come to elements where he's reclaimed his throne, he's reunited with his lover, you can have the colour that he is described as having. Practical effects over the CGI, obviously there's still some CGI, but the amount of practical effects used was unreal. The shot involving the dolphins as well, though that's one little moment, like, it's just one way that the world wants the film to be better. You know? And the IMAX cameras. Some people have a problem with it because it means you have to go see the film in IMAX. I don't think you do. I've heard people enjoying it plenty in normal theatres. I think you should just ignore the bad press and go see it for yourself if you want to make a decision. Personally, it being filmed in IMAX makes it unreal. You don't have to see it in 70mm. I didn't. This scale, the way it captures everything, this being the first film filmed entirely with IMAX cameras, was incredible. Oh my. And the little bits of CGI they use, it never feels like it's trying to replace the practical filmmaking. It enhances it, and it makes the mythical elements feel believable without becoming this cartoonish puppet, you know? I love the practicality being the base for everything. Visually, this film, it's perfect. And we're on to another perfect part of this film, the score. This soundtrack, a great soundtrack for a film, doesn't just accompany it. It genuinely shapes your experience, because if you go into a film and it has a shit soundtrack, you're not going to enjoy it. But this one, Ludwig Göransson, I bow to you. What a talent. My man was reviving old instruments and purely using them to make the score. What dedication. I genuinely can't believe the stuff he was doing when you watch some of the behind the scenes bits. Will this be remembered as a soundtrack alongside Nolan's best? Yes! I think this is the best soundtrack you've ever had in a Nolan film. And I'm sorry, People might hate this. People might say, oh, Interstellar. Yeah, I don't care. This was an unreal soundtrack. The main theme, I loved the siren song. Oh my god, the emotional music and the throwback with the restringing and then the plucking of the bow from in the start and then at the end, when everyone realizes it's Odysseus again. Genuinely, so good to see. The themes this film explores as well, it's the same as the book, you know? It discusses letting people into your home, you know, Zeus's law. I do actually think they rely on this whole Zeus's law thing a bit too much. I know that is a big sentiment in the books, but also I think you maybe could have called it what it is. I know then, you know, it's a Greek word, but another qualm, I guess, with the film to show that it isn't a perfect film. But the ideas of home, family, identity, leadership, loyalty, morality, oh my god, it literally covered every base. This film wasn't just asking whether Odysseus can get home, it's asking whether he will be the same person as he was when he left. It was unreal. I spoke about the adaptation previously when I was talking about the story. There were many scenes removed. There are things like Odysseus making another stop on his way home. Once he sails back from Calypso in the poem and the epic, he has one final stop. Poseidon destroys the raft Odysseus builds after leaving Ogygia the island, and he eventually reaches Scheria, home of the Phaeacians. This is where you get the whole story with Nausicaa, King Alcinous and Queen Arete. During a royal banquet, he then tells the story of the Trojan War, instead of us getting it as flashbacks during the whole film, where it's presented to us as him explaining it to Calypso while trying to regain his memory. Moved by everything, he then gets given a ship and crew, and they escort him safely back to Ithaca. This then leads to the destruction of Phaeacia, where Poseidon gets very angry that they hosted Odysseus, not necessarily knowing who he was. There's other parts like the fate of the handmaidens, that's a very much darker point. I do understand why it was left out, because the fate of them is pretty dark, especially when you read it, you're like, wow, okay. I don't think that necessarily presents Nolan's vision of Odysseus. I think the vision of Odysseus that Nolan wants is not for him necessarily to be seen as what Telemachus and Odysseus do to all the slaves and handmaidens. You know, the ones that sided up with the suitors, they get murdered by hanging, and it's one of the darkest moments in the entire film. Though you could make the argument it should have been included because Nolan went for a darker approach to this film, which he certainly did. There were some definite horror moments in it that were really done well, especially with Polyphemus and the Cyclops moments. But yeah, there's also another moment with Athena preventing another battle after the suitors are defeated. It kind of just ends. But I get that. You miss Odysseus reclaiming his throne. Odysseus and Penelope choose to leave Ithaca as an act of redemption, but that is a major change from the ending in the book, because once Athena restores peace between Odysseus and the families of the suitors, Odysseus remains king, he is not exiled. So that is the biggest change, I think. And, you know, there's also others, with Circe's relationship with Odysseus being very different. They become lovers in the book, with Odysseus staying on her island for an entire year, while Circe feeds and looks after his crew. And the Calypso storyline has also changed very completely. He slowly remembers his past through flashbacks while trapped on Calypso's island, giving him the lotus flower that keeps him confused, which is accurate to what the lotus flower would do. But these two storylines are separate in the book. They appear much earlier in the journey when they land on the island of the Lotus Eaters, eating the flowers, and then they lose all desire to return home, have to be physically dragged onto the ship. However, Calypso does this for Odysseus, keeping him away for a long, long time, refusing to let him leave for 7 years, because she wants him to stay with her. And in the book, Hermes arrives with a message from Zeus, ordering her to release him. That is also not included. There is also skipping the entire story of the Bag of Wind, and I actually think that would have been a good thing to include, because if Nolan had included this, it would have shown us the discourse between Odysseus and his crew a little bit better. I do obviously understand that you cannot fit everything in. It would be like a 5-hour film. Maybe you should have made it a show, but then Nolan doesn't make shows. You know, you could have definitely made loads of arguments. But in the book, Ithaca comes into sight, Odysseus falls asleep on his boat, and they have a bag of winds, of all of the winds from all corners of the world. And they open the bag, even though Odysseus tells them not to, and it sends their ship all the way back to Aeolia, where they return. Aeolus refuses to help them again because he believes that they have been cursed. That entire storyline gets skipped as well. The nobody trick, I think, was one of the biggest miss-outs, because he announces himself after Polyphemus saying, "Oh, my name is Nobody." So he says, "Nobody tricked me, nobody's ruined me." And then only after escaping, Odysseus reveals his name, allowing Polyphemus to pray to his father, to then set the anger on Odysseus because they then know Odysseus is, who he is, not just nobody, so Poseidon can then pursue his wrath on an individual. Most of the gods never appear either, only really Athena. And there is councils of the gods during the whole film. That doesn't happen. The olive tree bed test being left out as well, again, has people a little bit annoyed, because it's an iconic scene that shows the love and relationship with Penelope outwitting Odysseus, asking them about the immovable bed carved from the lining of an olive tree, and instead it's replaced with a different moment of recognition involving the Athena figurine that he's given. I understand that. I understand the difference, but it would have really shown them as a very dynamic couple. He did it well, but I think the olive tree thing would have done it better. Let me know if anything else was left out. That's all that I really noticed. But I don't think that takes away from the incredible film that this is. And yeah, I think, agreeing with myself, I don't think it's a bad adaptation. There's definitely some parts that should have been removed, should have been kept. Yeah. But that's the same with any adaptation. I don't think you will ever have a perfect adaptation. You're never going to please everybody. And something as iconic as Homer's Odyssey, you just cannot please everybody. I think Nolan should take on the Iliad or the Aeneid. I think actually out of the three of these giants in classical literature, I think the Iliad Nolan would make perfectly. I think that fits his style so well. Obviously, the Odyssey is so iconic. But hey, maybe he'll do all three. Would that not be awesome? There are plenty of negatives. My biggest criticism is probably some of the pacing. There are moments in the film where you know what's going to happen because it's in media res, yet the characters don't, so that can feel a bit slow. There's several scenes that repeat a similar emotional beat while they are well acted. You could trim 20 minutes, 10 minutes from this film, but then my opinion is there's things that should have been kept in. So I think you could trim 5 or 10 minutes to include things like the olive bed, to include things like more moments for Athena, more moments for the Council of the Gods, to explain why Poseidon's so pissed. I think, after everything we've talked about, where do I land on the Odyssey as a whole? Is this Nolan's best film? It's up there. Where does it rank against everything else? Again, it's up there. I think the Odyssey succeeds because it understands the original poem wasn't just about monsters and the mythical creatures. It is a story. It's about that perseverance, family, and identity, finding home, what that can be. And I think Nolan does capture that amazingly. And the filmmaking of this was incredible. It's not a perfect film. It's more of an incredible and perfect film than it is a perfect adaptation. I think you can split the two. It's not the perfect adaptation of the Odyssey, but it is a near perfect, visually stunning. The pacing does lose momentum. I think it could be shorter, but you cannot please everyone. Genuinely, this for me is like a 9, but there is no way this film is lower than a 9. This is another unreal film to add to his filmography, and I so recommend you seeing it in IMAX if you can. If you can't, you can definitely go see it, Doesn't take away from the story and the stunning audio and the stunning visuals. Did you guys enjoy it? Did you live up to the hype, or do you think it missed the mark? Please let me know down below, and if you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe to me for more film reviews. I rank things, I discuss things, and I'll review everything when it comes out, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.